Hey, welcome back to the part B of the conversation with Mariko Fairley, a certified behavior analyst with over 20 years of experience. In the previous episode, we focused on understanding why kids are behaving. In this episode, we focus on what kind of responses reinforce the behavior you want to see in your child. Do parents have to respond to everything their kids are saying or doing? How to build the internal motivation? And how to use wisely the reward system. We also touched a bit about sibling fights, and Mariko Fairley again gave her perspective and tips. So let's give the music its place and start. Welcome to the Playground Talks podcast, a podcast for busy parents who want to own their parenting style and develop a stronger sense of how to handle challenging situations. I am Tamia Friat, your host, and a mother of 3. In this podcast, I will interview psychologists, practitioners, behavioral therapists, teachers, and other experts about topics that bother all of us as parents, so you can get both the parenting principles and practical aspects that resonate with you, give you confidence and joy. So the whole applied behavioral analysis is based on reinforcement system. How does it look like, the reinforcement system in sessions, or if you can give some specific tips of how to make a beneficial reinforcement system in the house?
Okay, yeah. So I think the cool thing, again, about behavior analysis and reinforcement specifically is it's happening all around us all the time, and we don't even know it. So every interaction that you're having, like you and I having this conversation right now, you're asking me a question, I'm responding, and you're saying something back to me, that's reinforcing my response, right? And that's what's allowing us to have this back and forth conversation. So I gave the example of a paycheck, right? Going to work and getting a paycheck is reinforcing your going to work behavior. It's reinforcing you getting up every morning, driving to work, putting in your 8 hours and, working really hard. Same thing, like if let's say you had a new shirt and you wore your new shirt to work and you got a lot of compliments on it, and that led to you wearing that shirt more often, those compliments are reinforcing your wearing a new shirt behavior. Reinforcement just means that a behavior is going to increase in the future. So reinforcement is a consequence that leads to a behavior happening again. So whenever you hear the word reinforcement, that's really what it means. Something is going to happen again. And so when our kids are doing something, this is why I say pay attention to the behaviors that you want to see. Because for most kids, our attention is very reinforcing. So whatever we pay attention to, they're going to keep doing. And so if a child is doing something that we don't really want to see, and that's the only thing we're commenting on, even if we're trying to correct their behavior, the reality is we're giving them a lot of attention. And so we need to shift that and start paying attention to the appropriate version of that behavior. If your child asks for something in an appropriate voice, they're not whining, that's the time to give it to them, because giving it to them for asking nicely is going to increase or reinforce that nice asking. If they start whining and you say, oh, here, fine, just have it, guess what? You just reinforce or increase that whining behavior so that the next time they want something, they know they can get it by whining, right? So in every situation, there's sort of two options. There's like the behavior that you want to see and the behavior that you don't want to see. So give them what they want for the appropriate behavior, and that's what you'll keep seeing.
I like how you say that if someone wants to get something, or even the attention, just simply the attention, if he gets the positive feedback or the negative feedback, like you did such a great job or you misbehave, he's still getting the attention. So if we want to reinforce the right attention, then we need to put more effort in commenting and praising the positive behavior, and this way we will reinforce in the future the thing that we want to see more.
Yes, Absolutely. And I think what's important to remember about, so we're talking about the 4 reasons why behaviors happen. So they want something. If they want something and, your child comes up to you and says, "Mommy, I want a cookie." And they ask really nicely. What they want in that moment is the cookie, right? So giving them the cookie is what's going to reinforce the nice asking. Does that make sense? It's the thing that they want. "Mommy, I want to play with Play-Doh." Giving them the Play-Doh is going to reinforce the nice asking for Play-Doh. Us saying to them, "Nice asking, thanks for asking," that's not what's going to reinforce the nice asking. It's giving them what they want in that moment. So I think it's important to understand the distinction between verbal praise and like the tangible item that they want when they're communicating with us. Something you said triggered this in me. I really want to talk about reinforcement and praise because I feel like a lot of parents, and there's a lot out there on social media, and they talk about sort of the inauthenticity of praise. And what I would say to that is praise doesn't have to feel inauthentic, right? It doesn't have to be forced. It doesn't have to be anything other than a simple acknowledgement of a behavior, right? So we don't have to say, "Good job, good job." That's not actually super helpful because it's not very descriptive. So we can be a little bit more specific in our praise, and it can just be a simple description of what you're seeing. "Wow, I noticed you shared your toy with your sister and she smiled." You're not putting anything of your own like expectation or pride in that. You're simply pointing out exactly what you saw, and that's going to help your child make a connection. A lot of people might just say, like a child shared with their sibling, "Good job. Good job sharing." Okay, like, yeah, that's true. Yes, they are sharing, and yes, we want to point that out to them. But maybe that brings in sort of this external feedback, whereas we want to teach them to be intrinsically motivated to share. And so if we just make the acknowledgement, "Hey, I noticed this, and this is how your sister felt about it. How did that make you feel when you shared your toy and you saw how happy she was?" That's how we build the internal or intrinsic motivation to do these behaviors.
I like how you said that sometimes we don't need to praise them because they actually got the cookie they wanted. So we need to say nothing, just give them the cookie and say, "Enjoy it."
Yeah, there you go. Right?
Yeah, I like it. We don't have to praise for every single thing. We just think about the natural consequences and understand this is the best reinforcement. And that would bring them their inner motivation to keep on doing it.
Yes, exactly. Exactly what you said. If somebody is already motivated to do something, they don't need us to kind of jump on the bandwagon and comment and compliment and all of that stuff, right? Our praise should be reserved and our reinforcement should be reserved for things that are more challenging for them, for behaviors that don't happen very often, that we are trying to increase in the future. So every once in a while, sure, of course, praise and acknowledge the things, and "Oh my goodness, that was, so impressive." I'll use that word with my kids a lot. Like, "I'm so impressed by you." I'm not putting like my own thing on them. It's like they did it on their own and they already feel good about that. Just embrace that. That's amazing. They're building their own confidence and they don't need me to kind of jump in on top of that.
Mm-hmm. So I want to ask you your opinion about something. We used a lot the reward system that whatever they do, the routine morning smoothly, they get the star. And I want to ask, first of all, if you like that kind of thing. And also, let's say there is a difference between me putting the sticker for them or they put the sticker themselves. Would you think it has any change? Would you consider those two actions differently? Meaning when I'm putting it, I'm giving the reward and this is kind of external feedback. And if they put it to themselves, would you consider that to be an internal feedback?
Yeah, I love this question. So I would say, first of all, I don't have a problem with using visuals with kids, especially because look, listen, we use them ourselves, don't we? You have a long to-do list. My guess is you're writing it out, and then when you finish your task, you're crossing it off. Guess what? That act of crossing it off and finishing that task, that's reinforcing for you, right? Because you're making progress on your list. So I have no problem with visuals. I think my big thing is we need to support kids in the way that they need to be supported. And some kids, especially like with morning routine, bedtime routine, they have a hard time with it for whatever reason. There's a lot of things that a lot of what I remember when we were talking about have tos. There's a lot of have tos that have to get done in the morning and the evening. And so sometimes having a visual can be really helpful for them. So that's sort of different than what you're talking about. But having a reward system based on getting a task list done, it is a visual of sorts. It's a cue for them, right? Like that reinforcement is available if I do these things. And sometimes that's what kids need to do or need to have in order to feel motivated to get through those have-to tasks. So I don't have a problem with that. I would say, though, that that shouldn't be the end goal. The end goal should be that over time, again, what I see a lot of is I introduce this reward system. It increases my child's behavior. I'm happy with how they're responding. And so guess what? I'm just going to stop that reward system. And usually what happens is you just pull out that reward system. The behavior goes right back to where it was. And that tells you if that's what's happening, then you pulled it away too soon. It needs to be more gradual. So the end goal should be our kids are doing the morning and bedtime routine independently, and they no longer need these additional supports. They no longer need the visual checklist, or they no longer need those stars that they're getting for finishing each task. The end goal should be that, your acknowledgement, maybe getting an extra story because they've gone through it so quickly, that becomes the natural or logical reinforcer as opposed to this extrinsic star or treat that they're getting at the end, right? So whenever you introduce some sort of reward system, I would just encourage parents to think about how that plays out in the long term. How can you move toward getting them to do these things a little bit more independently over time and make sure you're not just pulling out the reward system when things start getting better? It needs to be more gradual. So like, for example, what I would say is intermittent reinforcement or reinforcement that happens every once in a while is what sustains behavior the longest. So when you go to Las Vegas and you're playing on a slot machine and you're pulling that lever, you're pulling because eventually you're going to hit the jackpot, right? It might take one lever pull or 10 or 100, but eventually you're going to win some money. The same thing goes for our kids. Initially, right, you're giving them a star for every task that they complete. They're getting that one-to-one reinforcement. But over time, you should start to phase that out or thin the schedule of reinforcement so that they're getting it after every second or third task. And then eventually they're getting the star after completing the entire list. Or maybe they get a star every other day. But that every once in a while, because it's not predictable, they don't know when it's going to happen, just like you don't know when you're going to win that jackpot. It sustains your behavior long term because you know it's going to happen, but you don't know when. So you're going to keep behaving in that way because you want that thing, whatever it is, that prize. So going back to your question about who should deliver the stars, I think with the stars, it's extrinsic no matter what. But I like the idea of saying like, wow, you brushed your teeth. Go put your star on your star chart. That's great. That's more similar to you crossing off your task on your to-do list, as opposed to, a parent having to come in and say, here, you earned this. Yeah. It gives them control, gives them power.
Yeah, I like it because we're actually want to create those healthy habits for our kids. And so this is just a tool to make them start and do it from an external feedback, but as they do it and they feel comfortable. So this is the place where the natural consequence comes. They feel clean. They get ready on time. They get more time for reading good books. This is how we gradually can decrease the amount of external feedback we need as a parents to put in there. So I really like it. And I just post on my Instagram and what James Clear wrote about habits. Are you familiar with this one?
A little bit, yeah.
That you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the levels of your systems, which is technically when you have a good habits, then you don't have to put extra work or resources of time and thinking. You just simply do it and it's done. So for me as a parent, that's what I want for my kids, to be independent and have a healthy habits in morning and, and evening routine.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So I really like the way you make us understand the evolution of the feedbacks, the external and internal feedbacks. Thank you so much. It was great. I wanted to ask you about siblings fight. Does it fall into one of the 4 categories when siblings are fighting?
Absolutely. Every behavior can fall into that category, right? So they want something, they don't want something, they need attention or connection, or it feels good. And I'm sure that if you're imagining your kids getting into an argument, every situation is a little bit different. And so if we have a blanket response to every situation, if we're kind of jumping in and saying the same thing, hey, if you guys can't get along, I'm going to take away that toy. Right? That's probably one of the most common things that parents do. They jump in, they separate, and they say, if you can't play nicely, I'm going to take away this toy. That does not address the underlying issue. And so what's going to happen is if we don't understand the why, we can't understand and address that underlying issue to change the behavior. We're just going to keep seeing the same situation over and over again. So if we notice that whenever they play with blocks, for example, that becomes a problem because one child wants to build and one child wants to crash. That's important for us to understand. One kid wants something, one kid wants a different thing. We can set up a situation where they're both getting their needs met, right? But that we have to figure out what's going on and not just come in and say, okay, we're going to put the blocks away, because putting the blocks away doesn't help them work through that challenge. It doesn't work on their communication skills and it doesn't work on their coping skills. But I have a great solution for that, for the blocks. I'll just share it. I like to set up crash zones. So when my kids were little, that was a huge thing. I mean, they're still little, but like when they were toddlers, especially, one wanted to crash the other stuff, we would set up a crash zone. There was a building zone for the kid who wanted to build, and with the same materials, the same blocks, there's a crash zone over here. This is where you're allowed to destroy and make a mess and, crash. And that resolved so many of their fighting challenges because they could each get what they needed and they didn't have to mess with the other person's things.
So crashing just make me think about the sensory part. It feels good to throw and hear everything falling apart. And so that's what I'm thinking. Okay, I have another example for you. Kids that are fighting in the car. What is this about?
What are they fighting over?
Which music to play.
Okay. So that one you can probably resolve by taking turns, I would say. First, we'll listen to your song, then I'll listen to your song. I think turn taking is really, really key for siblings. We should be doing this from a very early age across all examples. And I love the car one, especially because it's not like a tangible thing that they're holding and sharing back and forth. It's, taking a turn with being first, for example. I think that is really, really helpful. One thing I'll say is we can't expect our kids to share before the age of 3 or 4. Sharing does not develop as early as we expect it to. And so practicing turn taking is a really great way to have an alternative to sharing. They're passing something back and forth, or they're exchanging toys, or they're, exchanging opportunities to do something. And that will set them up for sharing later on when it's more developmentally appropriate.
Okay, so I'm sensing from you is not necessarily to decide for them, but to guide them into the solution.
Yeah.
So with the car example, I want to ask you, when would be a good time in terms of the kids' age to let them decide between themselves who's going to be the first one to choose the music?
That can happen early on in the, in the preschool years for sure. And so you can have your kids, like if they're older, they're maybe 6 and 8, I would just say like, you guys work it out and let them practice those negotiating skills, that's a good life skill to have. If you have younger kids, maybe they're more like 3 and 5, then there are other things that you can do, even as simple as like flipping a coin, or you had it first last time, now it's, your sister's turn. My kids like to play rock, paper, scissors to see who goes first, or they do like these little games, bubble gum in a dish. How many pieces do you wish? So there's so many ways to like make it fun and not have to, you teach them a couple of those games and then they can handle it on their own. You don't have to jump in every single time. You guys say, oh, you guys, do rock, paper, scissors and let me know who won and who's going to, choose the song.
So until there are, let's say, 5, you are more of a coach that helps them understand their negotiation skills. And then as soon as they reach 5 or 6, depends on the kid and his ability to advocate himself, then you would suggest, you know what, you can negotiate it and let me know, what have you decided?
Yeah, I really think that we as parents, I like that term coach, right? We should either be the coach or the sportscaster, where we are describing what we're seeing. Like, I can see you guys both want to play with the red truck. How can you work this out? So that we are not being the referee where we're jumping in and we're intervening, because inevitably when you're the referee, you're making a call about what the situation is. And it typically ends up being you're picking a side. Someone's right and someone's wrong. So, nope, you need to give that to your brother. He had it first. And we're inserting ourselves into this situation where if we weren't there, they'd have to figure it out in some way. I mean, I think the only time that we really need to intervene is if it gets physical. So if they're physically hitting and fighting and somebody's really upset, absolutely intervene and separate. But otherwise, like, be okay with a little bit of discomfort and a little bit of argument if it means that they're learning to communicate with each other.
So I like how you said, do not get yourself to be the judge, but just reflect what you're saying.
Yeah.
And let it resolve itself.
And you know what? It's uncomfortable and it takes time. I don't want to say that, because it's not going to happen right away. Right? But the more consistent we are with it, the more practice they have with working things out, the more frequently it will happen that their behavior is being reinforced. It's going to happen more in the future. And we won't have to do that as much.
Yeah, I like how you said we don't have to own our kids' feelings or discomfort. Like you mentioned before, the example with the raincoat, that they will be cold. Okay, don't own it. Let them be cold. And they will understand.
They will change their behavior for the next time.
Mariko, you gave us so much great tips and perspective about how to be a parent that gets the outcomes he wants. Thank you so much.
I really appreciate chatting with you. It was so fun, and thank you for having me on.
Wow, we had so much. Thanks for joining this conversation. We started here talking about reinforcement. It just means that the behavior is going to increase in the future. So reinforcement is a consequence that leads to a behavior happening again. And now for the practical aspect, how do we reinforce a behavior? So we talked about, I would say, 3 main things. The first is focus on praising the behavior you want to see. And with positive behavior, it's really easy for us to say things. But I want to remind you that one of the reasons for child behavior is attention. And in this case, if you give your child a negative feedback, he still gets the attention. So his needs met. And that's what I want you to remember, that either negative or positive feedback is a feedback, is an attention, and that you want to find a different way to respond. You can say, I get that you want my attention, but when you'll ask it politely, I will respond. And then just keep on doing whatever you want to do and keep the attention as little as you can. The second thing is save the praise to areas that are more challenging for your child. Going back to the reasons that kids can behave, sometimes it's because of tangible, so they want to get something. And so in this case, if your child asked politely for the ice cream or toy and he got it, then his need met. And in this case, as a parent, you can simply say nothing or say, enjoy the toy or bon appetit for the ice cream. So just remember that when you're praising, you don't always have to praise it. And also when you're praising, be descriptive and specific. Also, you don't have to integrate to the praise your expectation or your judgmental point of view. For example, listen to the difference between saying, good job sharing your toy, versus saying, oh, I've noticed you share your toy with your sister and it made her smile. She was happy. How did you feel about that? Did you notice the difference? The second way I was responding led to build the internal motivation, and that's what we want to develop in our kids. More example could be, wow, this room is organized. Or, wow, your dinner plate has so many colors. It has a variety of food. So simply describe what you're seeing, acknowledge what you noticed, and leave your expectation and judgmental point of view aside. So other than focusing on praising the behavior you want to see and saving praises to the challenging area of your child, we also talked about reward system as a visual to help your kids with the morning and evening routine. We did it in our house and it was really beneficial. And here there are two things to remember. The first thing is allow your kids to put the sticker or check the task themselves. And then the other thing is keep in mind to gradually decrease the use of the visual, because at the end of the day, you want them to be independent. Another thing we talked about is kids fight, where Mariko mentioned that each fight should be handled differently because the reasons that causes it might be different. However, the one thing that you could always apply is with little kids, you can coach and guide them how to solve the conflict. Just teach them how to communicate their needs and desires. So for example, with tangible, if they want to have some other kid's toy, then you can teach them how to ask for it. With attention, if one kid is bothering his brother, then you can teach him how to invite his sibling to play with him. And also remember that with little kids, depending on their developmental stage, if they're not talking fluently or not talking at all, you can also teach them how to nonverbal communicate their needs. Think about gesture that can show what they want. If a child is crashing his sibling's tower, maybe he wants to hear everything crashes. It makes him feel good. Remember, we talked about that reason. So in this situation, you can designate a crash zone in the house, and this will solve the problem. As kids get older, as a parent, you not necessarily need to guide them. You can just give them the time. And one thing I want to remind you as well is modeling in anything your child is doing. Sometimes we don't have to talk about it. For example, the other day, my kid slammed the door of the fridge. And then I said nothing. I was just walking toward the fridge. I opened the door. I closed it gently. And I looked at my kids. And we were both smiling. So sometimes you don't need to say something. Just model what you want to see. We had so much good tips around here with Mariko Fairley, and if you want to see and get more of her content and to connect with her, look at the show notes. All the links are there. Also, thank you again for listening. And did you find it helpful? If so, please share it with your friends. subscribe to the Playground Talks podcast and leave a review. Just leave a star. And remember to treat yourself and your kid with compassion and curiosity.